My father gathered the entire culinary board to announce my removal. Victor is the future. You're just an operational liability. He smirked. You never had what it takes. I smiled, thanked them for the clarity, and left. Today, 6 months later, they're begging me to save their restaurant. Founders Feast was the kind of event where you dress like your resume could be printed on your lapel. Everyone showed up in their finest: chefs, critics, donors, and legacy family members whose names still carried weight in the industry. I showed up in a tailored navy jacket, my knife calluses still faintly visible, hoping this would finally be the night. My name is Eli. I'm 33 years old, and I live in San Francisco. I grew up around simmering pots and blunt critiques, but I'd still somehow held on to the hope that tonight, my father would finally acknowledge what I'd done. The estate looked like something out of a French documentary: iron gates, ivy-laced stonework, and staff gliding through the grounds like trained dancers. This was our family's heart: the estate, the restaurant, the reputation. And tonight, the dining hall was bursting with clinks of crystal and the low hum of generational power. I shook hands, kissed cheeks, nodded politely through backhanded compliments. You've really turned things around at Talamont, Eli, someone said with a too-sweet smile. Didn't think the boy with spreadsheets and sauce charts could pull it off. Appreciate that, I murmured. I had learned to keep my tone pleasant, neutral, like I was always one course away from being evaluated. My father, Chef Marcus Brenner, was a monument in the culinary world. Not just respected, worshipped. He didn't cook anymore, not really. He managed, curated, and orchestrated, but the legend of his early knives-on-the-line days still followed him like a perfume. Tonight, he stood at the head of the long banquet table, a wineglass in hand. Beside him was Victor, my older brother, for years ahead of me in both age and ego. Victor knew how to work a room. He smiled like his teeth had press releases, wore tailored suits that screamed food media darling, and managed to show up to half the actual work. I sat 3 chairs down, across from the former dean of the Culinary Institute, heart humming with cautious hope. We were midway through the 3rd course, a foie gras mousse with fig mostarda, when my father cleared his throat. I want to thank everyone for joining us on this year's Founders Feast, he began. It's more than just a tradition. It's a celebration of legacy. A few claps. Soft smiles. Someone muttered amen under their breath. He turned to Victor and clinked his glass. And tonight, we continue that legacy. Effective next month, Victor will be stepping in as the new chair of the board for Brenner Culinary Holdings. My fork froze in midair. For a second, I thought he had misspoken. Then the words registered. The air around the table changed: gasps, raised eyebrows, the slow-motion horror of everyone looking to see my reaction. As part of this transition, my father went on, Eli will be stepping down from his leadership duties and moving into a more advisory role. Victor beamed like he'd just won a Michelin star for existing. I put down my fork. It took everything in me to not break. I stood slowly. Thank you, I said, my voice calm. Really? This brings clarity. My mother, sitting beside Dad, her mouth slightly parted, looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't. I gave them all one more glance, like I was looking at a photograph I never wanted to see again. Then I pushed in my chair and walked out. No speech, no scene, just the sound of my own footsteps as I left behind everything I had worked for. No one followed. Back then, they called me the systems guy. Not because I wasn't a chef, I was, but because I cared about things no one else noticed. Food waste patterns, prep station ergonomics, optimal walk-in temperatures down to 1/10 of a degree. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud. I just worked. It started right after culinary school. While Victor was doing guest spots on travel food shows, I was scrubbing the grease traps at our flagship location, Talamont. That place was bleeding money when I got there. The menu was bloated, the kitchen staff was churning faster than a broken ice cream machine, and health code violations were becoming a regular concern. I didn't complain. I showed up early, stayed late. I revised vendor contracts, simplified the plating systems, digitized inventory tracking. When I noticed the delivery times weren't syncing with refrigeration cycles, I fixed that too. Not glamorous, but necessary. I remember one night in particular. It was 2 a.m., and I was elbow-deep in spreadsheets and cold brew. I had just mapped out a new prep flow that shaved 20 minutes off opening hours without compromising mise en place. Victor called from Spain. Hey, little bro, he said, his voice echoing through wind and music. Yes, who just did a truffle risotto demo with Ferran Adria? Cool, I replied, closing my laptop. Congrats. He didn't ask what I was doing. Victor's career was a curated reel of pop-ups, food and wine festivals, and viral plating videos. Dad loved it. Said it was good for brand exposure. He called Victor the face of the company. What he meant was, Victor smiled nice for the cameras and didn't question his authority. Me? I was reliable. Technical. My father once told me, you're not a visionary, Eli, but you're a good support. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that as long as the work spoke for itself, it didn't matter. The health code incident should have changed everything. We were weeks away from losing our license. Mold in the freezer walls, cross-contamination risks, all buried under a thick layer of denial. I stayed up for 72 hours straight. Personally cleaned the kitchen, fired the line cook responsible for the storage chaos, redesigned the sanitation protocol, and met with the inspector face-to-face. We passed the follow-up with flying colors. 2 weeks later, the board held a private dinner. Victor showed up, said a few words about leaning into heritage and innovation, and toasted with Dad. The press release called it a bold recovery, thanks to Victor Brenner's fearless leadership. I read that line 3 times in the break room, the sting of bleach still on my fingers. I didn't say anything. I just tossed the paper in the trash and got back to the prep list. But even after all that, I still held on to hope. Maybe Dad didn't know the full story. Maybe he just needed time to see me. Not the cleaner, not the fixer me. That's what I told myself, right up until the moment he handed Victor the reins at Founder's Feast and called my work an advisory role. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just been overlooked. I'd been erased. I didn't remember walking out of the banquet hall. One minute I was in that gilded room, the next I was outside under a cold stretch of stars. The sharp night air bit through my jacket, but I didn't feel it. My legs moved on their own, down the stone steps, past the valet who called after me, into the gravel lot where my car waited. I didn't start the engine right away. Just sat there in the dark, hands on the wheel, heart pounding in that slow, heavy way that doesn't feel like anger or sadness, just absence. Everything felt quiet. Too quiet. The interior of the car still smelled faintly of rosemary and engine heat. A forgotten wine bottle clinked in the backseat from last week's supplier run. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My tie was slightly off-center. My face was blank. I looked like someone who'd lost a bet they didn't even know they'd made. I drove aimlessly at first, down the winding estate road, past the highway ramps, through neighborhoods I hadn't seen in years. At some point, I ended up parked outside the old test kitchen, the one I used to sleep in during the health code crisis. The lights were off. Just me and the hum of the city in the distance. That's when it hit me, all of it. The years. The sacrifices. The blind faith. I leaned forward, resting my head on the steering wheel, and finally let myself feel it. Not cry. Just break. Quietly. Fully. Like a building gutted from the inside. I had spent my entire life chasing one thing, my father's approval. Every menu update, every late-night equipment fix, every spreadsheet, all of it was a prayer in disguise. A way of saying, see me. Please. See me. And tonight, he did. Just long enough to replace me. My phone buzzed once, a notification from the restaurant's group chat. Some staff member had posted a photo of Victor and Dad raising their glasses. The caption read, "Next chapter begins." I didn't open it. I tossed the phone in the passenger seat and stared out the windshield. A strange calm settled over me. Not peace. Not yet. But something steadier. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to go quietly into that advisory role and pretend it was enough. If they thought they could write me out of the legacy I built, they were wrong. They gave me clarity? Fine. Now I'd give them a reckoning. 2 days after the banquet, I called Nora. She picked up on the second ring, her voice tight with concern. I was at Founder's Feast, Eli. I saw the whole thing. Are you okay? I wasn't. But I said, I need your help. Nora wasn't just a pastry chef. She was a lifer, someone who'd grown up in the business like I had, except she'd long stopped trying to win anyone's approval. We'd known each other since culinary school, bonded over late-night coffee and our shared love for structure. If anyone would understand, it was her. We met that afternoon at a quiet cafe in Dogpatch, the kind of place with too much concrete and not enough sugar. I filled her in, everything from the announcement to the years I'd spent fixing the restaurant from the inside out. She didn't interrupt, just listened, then reached into her bag. I think you need to talk to someone, she said, sliding over a card. Madeline Sue, legal consultant, hospitality and equity affairs. She's not the kind of lawyer who files lawsuits, Nora explained. She's the kind who makes families nervous. I called Madeline that night. She was clinical but sharp, every sentence trimmed of excess. We met at her office 2 days later, where she laid it out plainly. You're not just dealing with a bruised ego. This is about inheritance, ownership, and possibly suppression of intellectual property. I didn't sign anything, I told her. I was always informal. It was family. She raised an eyebrow. You'd be surprised how often family ends up being shorthand for exploitation. She gave me a checklist, documents, contracts, recipe logs, communication records. And if you ever kept a physical journal or binder of any kind, she added, find it. I returned to the old test kitchen that night. The place hadn't changed much, still smelled like burnt flour and ambition. My workstation was untouched. No one had bothered to pack it up, which meant no one had rifled through the filing drawers. That's where I found it. Tucked behind a stack of invoices in the bottom drawer, a worn leather binder I hadn't seen in years. Inside were printed recipe drafts, sketches of menu flowcharts, and at the very back, two things that stopped me cold. First, an unsigned co-head chef agreement, dated 4 years ago. It outlined a split leadership role between Victor and me, complete with equal voting rights on the restaurant board. My grandfather's letterhead was on the top. Second, a letter, handwritten, folded neatly. It was from my grandfather, the founder of Brenner Culinary. I recognized the ink, the neat cursive. Eli, it began, you see things others don't. The future of this place will need both your fire and Victor's polish. I know your father favors flash, but I built this with sweat. And so did you. I want you both to lead equally. I sat down on the floor and read it twice. Then I took a picture. Then another. Then I called Madeline. She answered on the first ring. Did you find anything? Yeah, I said, my voice steady now. I found everything. The message came in the form of a voicemail. Eli, it's Antoine. Chef Antoine Mercier. I heard what happened, and I think it's time we talk. Antoine hadn't worked at Talamond in over a year. He was the last executive sous chef under my tenure before he quietly retired. I remembered how he used to carry a tiny leather notebook in his coat pocket, always jotting down notes after every shift. Recipes, supplier issues, prep walkthroughs. The man was meticulous, quiet, and loyal. At least, that's what I'd believed until now. We met at an old diner outside the city. Neutral ground. No culinary royalty lurking in the booths, just cracked vinyl seats and too much coffee. Antoine looked older. Maybe it was the lighting. Maybe just the weight of years spent swallowing what he knew. When I sat down, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick black folder. These are my records, he said. I kept everything. Recipes, modifications, daily logs, staff notes. You know why? I nodded. Because you knew something wasn't right. He opened the folder to a page dated 2 years ago. A dish that had made national press, Victor's black garlic trout with chestnut emulsion. The recipe had been my work, drafted at 2 in the morning, tweaked for 3 weeks, perfected on a Sunday when no one else showed up. Antoine pointed to the timeline. This entry here, he said, tapping the page, shows you testing it 5 days before Victor ever touched it. I have photos, too. Prep logs. Ingredient list with your initials. He flipped a few pages ahead. Another dish. Another Victor original. And then, the kicker emails. Forwarded from his old account, printed and highlighted. One from my father, dated March of last year. If Eli submits anything new, log it under Victor. We need a consistent brand face, no exceptions. Another. Presentation credit goes to Victor only. Eli's back-end role stays internal. No media involvement. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just stared at the paper, the ink, the sheer precision with which they'd erased me. Antoine sat back, watching me carefully. I wanted to say something earlier. I did. But your father, he made it clear there were consequences. For everyone. I cleared my throat, voice rough. Why now? He looked down at his coffee, then back up at me. Because what they did at that banquet, that wasn't just disrespect. That was a public burial. And you don't bury the man who saved your restaurant. He slid the folder across the table. I want you to have this. Use it. Burn the whole damn lie down. I nodded, still trying to keep my composure. You'll testify, if it comes to that? He didn't hesitate. I will. We shook hands, firm, final. On the drive back, I glanced at the passenger seat where the folders sat. Pages upon pages of receipts, logs, and betrayal. They thought they could write me out of the story. Now I had the original manuscript. Madeline didn't flinch when I handed her the folder from Antoine. She spread the documents across her office table like she was plating a 10-course meal. Everything arranged deliberately, carefully, with the kind of calm that said, I've done this before. This, she said, flipping to the March email from my father, is the beginning of the end for them. We filed for private arbitration within the week. It wasn't about going public. I didn't need headlines. I needed justice, clean, documented, undeniable. Arbitration meant confidentiality, but the consequences would be just as real. The moment the family got word, the call started. Victor left me a voicemail that sounded like a stand-up routine, smug, sarcastic, high off the confidence of someone who had never been held accountable. Wow, man, this is cute. A whole legal tantrum because daddy liked my ideas better? You always were the sensitive one. I deleted it. The next day, my father called. Ungrateful little bastard. He snapped as soon as I answered. You think this is how a son honors a family legacy? You made your choice, I said quietly. Now I'm making mine. He hung up. The deposition took place in a corporate law office downtown. Fluorescent lights, water pitchers, and 4 sets of lawyers trying to act like this wasn't personal. But it was. God, it was. My father sat at the far end of the table, jaw tight, suit impeccable, eyes burning holes through mine. Victor showed up late, of course, flanked by his lawyer, and looking like he'd just rolled out of a GQ shoot. He didn't sit. He sprawled. Madeline began. She moved through the evidence like a surgeon. Emails, prep logs, Antoine's testimony, all lined up like dominoes. This recipe, she said, pointing to the black garlic trout, was first entered into kitchen logs by Eli Brenner. Here is the photo of the original test plate with his handwriting. She slid over a timestamp picture. And here, she continued, is the internal email from Mr. Marcus Brenner, instructing staff to attribute all new creations to Victor Brenner for media consistency. Victor shifted in his seat. My father said nothing, but I could see the strain in his jaw, the way he gripped his pen like it might shatter. Antoine testified via video. Calm, clear, and damning. I was instructed to route all credit through Victor, he said. Eli developed those systems, those dishes, that recovery plan. I stand by that under oath. Victor tried to interrupt. Come on. Antoine's always had it out for me. Everyone knows he. Mr. Brenner, one of the arbitrators, cut in. Please refrain from editorializing. The rest of the deposition was quiet, tense but controlled. By the time Madeline presented the unsigned co-head chef agreement and my grandfather's handwritten letter, my father looked like a man watching his empire shift beneath his feet. This letter, Madeline said, clearly indicates founder intent. Joint leadership between Eli and Victor. The fact that this document was withheld is significant. The silence that followed was deep. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of realization. They knew. They'd been caught. Afterward, in the hallway, Victor pulled me aside. His voice was low, desperate, for once stripped of performance. Is this really what you want, Eli? To burn everything down? I looked him in the eye. No, I said. I want what I built to be mine. Or at least acknowledged. He didn't respond. Because there was nothing left to say. The truth was out. And their story, the one they'd written over me, was crumbling page by page. 3 weeks after the arbitration, the offer came in. It arrived as a thick envelope slid across Madeline's desk by one of their attorneys, a man with nervous hands and eyes that couldn't quite meet mine. They didn't want to go to trial. Too risky. Too many questions they couldn't control. Too many people who might start wondering how much of the Brenner brand was built on smoke and mirrors. The settlement was generous. More than I expected. 7 figures. A non-disparagement clause for public channels, sure, but no gag order in private arbitration records. And the most important part, formal acknowledgement, in writing, of my contributions. My recipe ownership. My process documentation. My crisis resolution protocols. My legacy. And finally, a clause I had insisted on. Effective immediately, Eli Brenner is released from any current or future association with Brenner Culinary Holdings, its board, its restaurants, and its brand subsidiaries. Freedom. The pen felt heavy when I signed it. Not because I was uncertain, but because it meant this was real. I wasn't walking away. I was closing the door behind me. When it was done, I walked outside, took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, didn't feel like I had to prove anything. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Some extended culinary friends, the ones who had kissed my father's ring for decades, went silent. Others sent polite but cautious texts. A few even unfollowed me on social media, like cutting ties would somehow keep them clean. But there were others too. Chefs, sous chefs, line cooks, former interns, people I hadn't heard from in years. You were the only one who taught me without making me feel small. They did the same thing to my cousin. You did what I wish he could have. If you're starting something new, I want in. Those messages mattered. They reminded me that legacy isn't a name on a building. It's how people remember how you treated them when no one else was looking. A month after the settlement, I signed a lease on a small cafe space in the Mission District. It had brick walls, a scuffed prep area, and a busted espresso machine. But it was mine. No plaques. No family name on the awning. Just a clean slate and an idea. I wasn't trying to rebuild the empire. I was building something better. Smaller. Sharper. Honest. The day we painted over the front window with butcher paper and a handwritten "Coming soon," a young couple walking by stopped and peered inside. The woman smiled. What's it going to be? I looked up from the counter, paint roller still in hand. A place that feeds people, I said, without starving the soul. It wasn't a slogan. It was a promise. One I intended to keep. 6 months passed like nothing and everything at once. The cafe, forge and field, opened soft, no PR blitz, no grand reveal. Just a quiet door on a quiet street, and the smell of seared onions and cardamom-laced pastries drifting through the cracked windows. We had a 6-person team, 3 burner stoves, and a policy that no one washed dishes alone. Most days, I was on the line, sleeves rolled up, running prep with interns who reminded me of who I used to be: hungry, unsure, full of questions and grit. We didn't serve anything photogenic enough for influencers. But every seat was full by noon. And then, on the anniversary of Founder's Feast, my phone started buzzing. First, a call from my mother. I let it ring out. Then 3 missed calls from a blocked number. Then a voicemail. Victor. His voice was tight, frantic, barely held together by whatever charm he had left. Eli, look, I know we haven't talked, but things are not good. There's a situation. We need your help. I didn't delete it. I didn't return it either. Within the hour, another message came in, this time from one of the junior board members I used to argue with over supplier contracts. Hey, just putting this on your radar. Victor's been making some calls. Word is, he's completely lost control. Staff walkouts. Menu inconsistencies. Investor tension. It's unraveling. Then my father called. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemail. Eli, it's your dad. I'm not going to pretend this is easy. I know we mishandled things. But you know this business. You know how fast it can fall apart. A pause. Then quieter. You're the only one who can fix it. I sat at the back of the cafe that night, the day's receipts spread out on the counter, the mixer humming in the kitchen behind me. Nora was piping cardamom cream onto citrus tarts, humming some old Billie Holiday tune. I stared at the blinking light on my phone. Then I picked it up, scrolled through the voicemails, and hit delete. One by one. No anger. No gloating. Just quiet. They were reaping what they sowed. And I was finally free. Success didn't look like the old family name etched in glass. It looked like my name scribbled on a handwritten menu. And it felt like peace. Founder's Feast came around again, but this time, there was no banquet hall, no photographers, no stage for ego to stretch itself across a polished floor. Just a dinner table in the back of Forge and Field, pushed together from 2 mismatched pieces of wood we'd salvaged from a closing bookstore. The lights were dim, the playlist was Ella and Coltrane, and the people in the room were mine, not by blood, but by choice. Nora sat to my left, still dusted in flour from her shift, nursing a glass of red like she'd earned it twice over. Across from her was Madeline, still in her blazer, still sharper than anyone in the room. One of our new prep cooks, Simone, brought in a pergolette that was still warm and apologized that it looked ugly. It didn't. I raised my glass halfway through the meal, a simple roast chicken with herbs from the rooftop planters, sourdough stuffing Nora had obsessed over for 3 days, and some carrot confit that turned out better than expected. Everyone quieted down, even though I hadn't asked them to. I know this day used to mean something different to me, I said, my voice steady. Used to be about legacy, name, blood, power. I glanced around the table. Madeline gave me a nod. Simone beamed like she didn't know she was doing it. But this year, I continued, Founder's Feast is something else. It's not about who gave me their name. It's about who showed up when I had nothing left. It's about the people who helped me rebuild, even when I didn't know what I was building. I paused. It's about truth. About boundaries. About the family you find when you stop begging for the one that never saw you. They raised their glasses with me. No grand applause. Just quiet acknowledgement. Like they knew exactly what I meant without needing more words. Later, as dishes were being scraped and laughter filled the spaces between seconds, I watched our team, all young, unsure, wildly talented, plate desserts for each other like it was a competition, all while teasing and tossing compliments like spices. It felt real. It felt like healing. After everyone left, I stood alone in the kitchen. The lights low, the counters wiped down, the last bit of lemon zest clinging to the edge of a cutting board. I thought about my grandfather's letter. About the dishes they tried to erase. About the boy who once worked himself to exhaustion for a seat at a table that was never meant for him. Then I thought about this table. About tonight. About how sometimes you don't rebuild the house that burned down. You build a new one. From scratch. And you fill it with people who actually want to stay.